Welcome to a special emergency edition of the Andy Staples Show. I'm here with Chris Benini. We're in Scottsdale, Arizona. We're here with a bunch of college administrators and coaches, and didn't think we'd be talking about college baseball with any of these people. And that's all they want to talk about, Chris, because this Alabama situation where they fired Coach Brad Bohannon on Thursday, it's connected to an investigation involving 2 bets that were placed on the Alabama-LSU game last week that caused the state of Ohio to take Alabama baseball off the board, and then the state of New Jersey followed up with that. Chris, this is I guess this was going to happen as sports betting became legal in more states, but I guess I was still surprised when college sports got wrapped up in it.
I tell you, one of the people who was here this week speaking to administrators in the conferences was Matthew Holt of U.S. Integrity, explaining how the issues of college gambling and sports and how they track things and the things that they flag. And who discovered the Alabama discrepancy? That would be U.S. Integrity.
So for those who don't know, this is what happened. Alabama was playing at LSU. So it's the first game of a 3-game series. Everybody's best pitcher goes Friday night. That's your Friday night starters. So game 1 of your conference series starters are your best pitchers. So Luke Holman was Alabama's Friday starter. He was a late scratch, and he was replaced by a guy named Hagan Banks. And so someone in Cincinnati at the Great American Ballpark, this is where the Reds play, placed a bet at the sports book at the Great American Ballpark. And there was a parlay that involved the Alabama-LSU game, and it was a money line bet on the Alabama-LSU game. So you say, I think this team's going to win, basically. And this happened right around the same time the decision was made to scratch Luke Holman.
About an hour before the game.
Yeah. And so Alabama falls behind. They actually came back in the game, almost got back, but lost 8-6. And then it wasn't till Monday that this was taken off the board in Ohio. But I talked to Matt Holt on Thursday. He said within minutes they knew something was up with this thing. And Bohannon was fired on Thursday after Alabama had conducted an investigation into what was going on. And, they tried to make very clear that there weren't any Alabama players found to be involved. I talked to the head of the Louisiana Gaming Control Board, and he said, we made sure there's nobody from LSU involved with this. And it seems to be Bohannon seems to have been the only person connected to this who was actually involved in the game. And we don't know all of the specifics of it yet.
Right.
But I imagine we'll get more of that, because I think this is the first time since Ohio legalized sports betting, and they went live on January 1st.
January 1st, right as Ohio State missed the field goal against Georgia.
In the Peach Bowl, yes.
At the exact same time the field goal missed, sports betting went live in Ohio.
Yeah, so this is a big deal for them. So I'm sure they're doing more of an investigation. I imagine they will probably reveal a lot. One thing I'm noticing about this, Chris, when you talk to people who have been involved in legal sports gambling for a long time, the people in Vegas, they're very transparent about a lot of this stuff.
Yes.
Because they feel like they have to be.
Yes. And the quote you got from the Louisiana Commission was basically like, this was the system working.
Yeah.
The fact that it was caught. Now, that doesn't mean they catch everything. They certainly don't. They will admit they don't catch everything. But that's why these integrity companies are really popping up a lot more, and they're getting involved with college sports. I was already in the process of...
The SEC actually has been using U.S. Integrity
SEC uses U.S. Integrity. The Big 12 does. Kansas State does. I was literally already in the process of working on a story on the state of college gambling, state of sports gambling in college sports. Picked it up after the Detroit Lions thing happened.
Yeah.
And literally last Friday, I was on a webinar with a bunch of people. Matt Holt was on, a couple other people, and they're asked, what are the odds there's going to be a major betting scandal in college sports within the next 3 years? They all said...
It was Matt Holt, like, within the next 3 days?
They all said 100%, and that is literally the day that the Alabama bet ends up happening. And so you've got schools that... A lot of administrators, they don't understand a lot of this stuff.
No.
So they need to contract a lot of these organizations.
Well, my first thought was, I need Ari.
Yeah.
I need Ari to explain everything to me, because I've tried to educate myself on this because it has become a big part of our jobs. But, this is a world that Ari has lived in for a while.
Yes.
And he would explain it very well. He's on his honeymoon still in the Turks and Caicos, and
it's probably killing him right now.
Oh, he's dying. I know he's dying. Not to be able to talk about this. We will talk about it.
He will have plenty
when he
to
comes
say
back,
about it
for
yes,
sure.
Yes,
but this is. I know some people are like, "What do you guys don't talk about college baseball ever? What do you care?" Because this could happen to the NCAA tournament in basketball. This could happen in football. What happened? Because what this appears to be, based on what the timing, everything else, is inside information being passed along.
Yes.
To cause a bet. Now, the idea that a head coach would be involved in that,
right,
making $500,000 a year, that was hard to wrap my brain around.
Right, because as part of that webinar last week, they were talking about all the issues that colleges have to face, and it was so much focused on the players who might be in a vulnerable position to be encouraged to do something. But as they also pointed out, Calvin Ridley, was
he makes a lot more than Brad Bohannon.
He makes a lot more, and he was caught doing something as well. And the point about baseball and this stuff, the experts who follow this stuff will tell you that it's the sports like baseball, like softball, like volleyball that are the ones that are perhaps more prone to these types of things. That doesn't mean you're going in and putting $200,000 on Alabama softball to win a game. That's going to be a red flag for anybody.
Well, nobody's going to take that bet.
Right.
That's what I did that a few years ago when the state started legalizing casino gambling or sports gambling, because I was trying to educate myself on it. And I called some people who work in Vegas at setting the line and that sort of thing. I said, okay, hypothetically, what if I put the fix in on a Furman Wofford women's basketball game, or a baseball game in the Big East? Do they even have baseball in the Big East? I'm not sure.
I don't know.
But yeah, Georgetown has a baseball team. Okay. So, but if you did that, and then I went and bet a lot of money on it, and all the people said, well, they just wouldn't take your action.
Right.
They'd say, or they'd say, we'll take $100 bet on this at most. And
it's fishy. It's immediately fishy if someone's putting it. So the biggest misnomer Matt Holt said was, it's not multi-million-dollar schemes that are the targets. It's really $1,000 on this, $1,500 on that. And if you do that over a large amount of bets over various places, that's where you start to kind of get the money that you're looking at.
So Matt Holt would not get into specifics about this particular case with me. He wouldn't tell me the amount of the bet, and he didn't say exactly what happened, but he did explain to me the triggers that cause, say, a sportsbook operator to call them, or that their system will flag, and their system is reading this in real time. It was interesting because I said, could any of this even been done 20 years ago? He said, no, our business wouldn't exist 20 years ago. It is examining all this information in real time.
Yes.
So it is examining the amount of the bet versus the amount of the bets placed on the game. That's called the handle.
Yeah.
The total amount
of money on the
placed on the game. The amount of the bet compared to the amount bet on similar type games. Is that unusual or is it normal? The frequency of the bettor, the behavior of the bettor, because that person's account, you know what sort of bets they've placed, how much they place. If anything is out of whack, if it's a sport they don't bet on, if it's an amount they don't normally bet, that's a red flag. The other one that Matt Holt mentioned that I hadn't even thought about, but it obviously makes perfect sense. If you just opened your account, or you had an account that went dormant and reactivated it suddenly, and placed a very large bet, that is that's huge an easy red flag.
Yeah. And Holt also said that they put out 15 to 18 red flags per month that they find out. I was talking to Gene Taylor, the AD at Kansas State. Yep. They work with U.S. Integrity. A couple of days or whatever before the Sugar Bowl against Alabama, U.S. Integrity reaches out to him, says, hey, we flagged something here. The spread went one way or whatever it was. And it was right at the moment that Bryce Young and Will Anderson decided to play. So
that's a pretty easy one.
That was a pretty easy one to understand what it was, but that's an example of something getting flagged. I had
something when I was covering Florida as a beat writer in 2006 for a newspaper, and this is when all of this information was not so voluminous and also not so fast. You couldn't examine it so fast. Marcus Thomas was one of their star defensive tackles at Florida. He had been suspended, and Urban Meyer wouldn't say when he was getting unsuspended. Like, you knew it was going to happen at some point, but he didn't say when the suspension was going to be lifted. Well, the Thursday before they played LSU, the line moved 4 points. I believe it went from Florida was a 2-point underdog to Florida was a 2-point favorite. It was something like that. It was a 4 or 4.5 point move in a very short amount of time. And then 4 hours or so later, it's announced that Marcus Thomas is going to play. And he was a pretty important part of their defense, especially against that offense.
Yeah.
And at the time, I didn't know who you would even call to find out about that.
Yeah.
And, I don't believe anybody found anything suspicious off of that. I'm assuming somebody found out before and told somebody, and then people started betting on it.
Yeah.
But this is the sort of thing that they are looking out for. And I saw somebody interacting with our pal Stuart Mandel on Twitter saying, now that the scourge of gambling is in every state, you're going to see more and more of this. And Stuart's response was, this was probably going on.
No, you're just
before.
catching more of
now
this.
You're catching it.
Talked to someone from the National Problem Gambling Corporation Company, whatever it is, and they said the amount of betting being placed in legal states versus illegal states is not any different. It's the same. It's to that point we said at the beginning, which is the transparency of it, airing it out makes it easier to catch and easier to work on.
The neighborhood bookie isn't contracting with U.S. Integrity to examine all the bets?
So. Yeah. And also one more thing, like this happened at it's kind of unrelated, the Great American Ballpark where the Cincinnati Reds play. The Cincinnati Reds, who famously had a certain baseball player / manager involved in sports betting.
But it also raises another red flag about this particular case?
What's that? You
know where the Reds were playing Friday night?
Not in Cincinnati.
Exactly. So this is
a road game.
I'm sure people are going into the sports book to bet when the Reds aren't there. But that, in this particular case, probably also set off another kind of alarm bell.
Yeah. I'd be curious at that specific sports book how much of the bets are based on Ohio and Cincinnati-based teams as opposed to an LSU Alabama
or how much, when the Reds are at home, how much are on that game?
Yeah.
Or live wagering props on that game, stuff like that. It's so interesting because there is a little chicken egg here. Like, are more people going to gamble because it's legal? I don't know.
More people are gambling. There was a survey, one of the groups had a survey of something like 75% of college students have placed a bet at some point. That could be a bracket, that could be whatever. Doesn't mean betting on a line of a game. And so it's become a lot more normalized. And that's when you see some of these athletes, some of these pro athletes, there's no way that they were doing this stuff.
The whole Lions thing seemed fairly tame.
Yes.
In general, but I understand where the NFL is coming from. They cannot let it be thought that their players are having any influence on the games from a betting perspective.
There's a lot of money in these deals and these partnerships that if sports betting is going to remain a big legal business, you've got to come down hard.
Well, and that's why this is a much bigger deal than just college baseball. Now, I realize some of our listeners in SEC country are like, there's not much bigger than college baseball, which is in certain pockets of the SEC, that's absolutely true. But this is something that could affect college basketball, college football. It could affect the NBA. Well, I mean, it has affected Tim Donaghy, affected the NBA. Yeah. You had a referee that was betting overs and unders affecting the game.
The college football national championship and March Madness are two of the top three most bet things in the country. The Super Bowl obviously being the other one. And but the gambling people, there's always a spike when the March Madness ends. There's a spike in bets placed on softball
because people still want that action.
Because the NBA and the NHL are into their playoffs when it's a lot harder to fix a game if you're in the playoffs, and you want that action. And so it turns into softball, it turns into baseball, it turns into these other things. Now, we don't know what Bohannon's whole situation was, but just in general, that's where the money starts to go.
I talked to John Murray, who runs the sports book at Westgate, the Superbook, and he was explaining that they don't get a lot of business on college baseball in the regular season. They said it does pick up a lot during the College World Series. So that was probably yet another thing that made this particular thing stand out. So it does not sound like there was a lot of genius being applied.
No.
With this wager or with this whole situation. So it's just really interesting that that's where it was. But it was but baseball or softball,
and
it was where it could break because that's again, people are coming off the NCAA tournament, they're coming off the Masters, they're coming out. these big events, and
you got to find the next thing
right now.
And the real concern in terms of a scandal happening in college sports is not about a money line necessarily. It's prop bets, it's in-game bets. Those are the hardest to track. If it's somebody missing free throws, somebody throwing an interception, run or pass on the first play, these are the types of things that are getting.
I would think amounts on in-game props are watched very closely.
Yes,
like a huge amount on an in-game prop. I would assume that the sports book's going to kick that back.
Yeah, and again, these are not the championship game where someone's going to throw the national championship or something like that. It's smaller types of stuff that may not seem like as big of a deal, but when that stuff all comes together, it starts to build.
We've seen a little bit of this in college sports before. There was the Arizona State scandal, as we sit a few miles from Arizona State's campus here. Tulane had a scandal in the 80s.
Shut down the team.
John Hot Rod Williams and that bunch.
Nearly shut down the football program.
Well, the Tulane scandal, I believe, when the way that one was discovered was a bookie figured out what was going on, but a bookie obviously can't call the authorities and say, can you investigate this?
Yeah.
So I believe the bookie called a sports book in Vegas and said, I think something's up with Tulane, and they called and had it investigated. And they called the FBI or somebody like that.
I think Mac Brown became the AD, or was the AD like when they went through all of that stuff?
Yeah, it was wild. You know, another thing I learned about that case, I was just reading up on it completely randomly the other day. Do you know who the district attorney in New Orleans was at the time?
Who's that?
Harry Connick Sr.
Huh.
Father of crooner Harry Connick Jr. So, yeah, it is a strange world. I'm actually surprised this doesn't happen, or maybe it doesn't get caught more often.
Right.
But maybe we will see it get caught more often, because that was the part I was fascinated by when I was talking to Matt Holt about how U.S. Integrity figured all this out. And I said, how long does this take? He said, this was deduced within minutes.
Yes.
By them.
And that's why the speed on that stuff is so important. It's why I think it was last fall or last year.
Because they've always got a human watching this stuff too. So the red flag goes up. The person, their employee who's working at the time, starts making phone calls, sending emails.
Yes.
And the information was gathered very fast.
Yes. And similarly, it's why last year the MAC made a deal with Genius Sports to handle its real-time data.
Yep.
And part of what they do with that data is sell it to the sports books.
Right.
And getting that information instantaneously from the official source as opposed to pulling it off of
and I talked
ESPN
to John Steinbrecher,
Gamecast.
the commissioner of the MAC, about this, and he said they would see people in stadiums. So I'm just making up the game. Let's say it's Toledo Bowling Green.
Yep.
They would notice someone in the stadium with a laptop just banging away trying to get stats to somebody very quickly, and they figured, well, if that person's going to get paid for this, why don't we get paid for this?
Yeah, and so you'll see more leagues, conferences doing this type of stuff, because that instantaneous, that also helps you flag something if you have the real time stats as opposed to delays and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it is. The level of computing power now makes this very easy to find, unless you are very sophisticated.
Yes. And there is a lot of money into making sure this keeps making a lot of money.
That's the part of it, because I get this from readers and listeners a lot, and I understand where it's coming from, because people who don't bet on sports look at this and there's a fear of games being fixed, a different element coming into the game, because gambling is linked to organized crime, or has been in the past, and people get worried about all that. And it's one of those things where I think the regulators are working so hard, and not even the companies that are involved are working so hard to show, hey, we're trying to make sure this is on the up and up. But there is so much money involved. This is the next wave of money coming into American sports.
That is why you saw a lot of schools last year in late 2021 partner specifically with sports books. I think LSU, they send an email out to a bunch of students about it. It was a bit too far. And so in March, the American Gaming Association, which is the lobbying group that works with a lot of these things, changed guidelines to say you can't partner with schools anymore, and you have to when you target college age kids, you have to do certain things on that. And so we've seen PointsBet, which had a deal with Maryland and Colorado, they pulled out of that. I think something in the Maryland state government was going to push back on that anyway. Michigan State had a deal with Caesars that I think they're kind of perhaps in the process of unwinding, and so you're starting to see the people who are trying to do the responsible part of the gambling, trying to make sure it stays that way.
Yeah, and it's very interesting because you guys who listen to the show know how this goes. Like, you hear Ari, this is a part of his life. This is what he does. It is recreation for him. It's entertainment for him. I've never done it. I still haven't done it. A lot of it was kind of fear, having over the course of having this job, I was always, I think at Sports Illustrated, it might have been a written policy that we couldn't.
Yeah.
But I always remember being told you cannot wager on these games.
And we have policy still around that.
On the ones we're covering or the ones we're actually physically writing about, the teams we cover.
Yeah.
But it's tough because this podcast was sponsored by BetMGM at one point. I accept that it's part of the ecosystem.
There was a BetMGM ad on our story about the Alabama situation.
Yes. So, I think we just have to acknowledge that it's part of the universe now. It's part of the sports ecosystem and get used to it. And look, in England, they've had betting kiosks at stadiums for forever.
And the Premier League just recently passed a rule that you can no longer have your jersey sponsor be a sports book.
Right.
They are starting to pull back.
But it was before.
Right. It was before. It was on every billboard you saw at the stadiums and all this stuff. And they were so far in that direction. They are starting to pull back on a lot.
Right.
Just as here in America, we're heading back up in that direction.
Yeah. I'll be curious to see if there's more regulation. I don't know how much more you can possibly regulate it, because it does seem like in most states the voters' appetite is allow it. And then
not in Texas where I'm at. The state legislature still not passing it.
I believe the two states where we live, Texas and Florida, they're probably going to be the last ones.
Also, Alabama.
Right. That's another one. Yeah. Yeah, and it is very interesting which states. It's funny. I wonder. I'm going to have to check the map of states that allow NIL deals for high schoolers and states that
overlap that
sports gambling. I think it's probably the same. The same allow it, and the same definitely don't allow it.
Could be.
So, but I do think the wave is coming. It's very similar. I think it's kind of similar to the marijuana laws.
Yeah,
where it's a feeling of this doesn't need to be illegal. People can do it responsibly. You alcohol, tobacco, those are legal. You just have to expect some responsibility from people. I think we'll probably see some form of sports gambling legal in all 50 states within 5 years, 10 years?
Probably. And the one difference being we're not getting marijuana ads on our games that we're watching. We're not being flooded with that kind of stuff.
We don't live in Colorado.
That's true. And to the point you mentioned earlier about fans who don't do this stuff, who are not interested in it, like XFL games, they put the spread up, they talk about this stuff. The Big 12 is going to have this, its games are going to have more in-access type of stuff. But from what I understand, they're not going to do that with the betting stuff that they've been doing with USFL, XFL, that type of stuff.
Yeah.
There's going to be a bit of a separation, but you're still going to be hit with
colleges, and as long as they are pretending that amateurism is a thing, I don't think they can.
No.
That's a line they probably shouldn't cross.
No.
Now, but if all that changes, which I think is a distinct possibility here in the next 10 years, you might see that change too.
And to go back to the players and the stuff that happens, I mean, we did a story last year on a Virginia Tech player who was suspended for betting on, I think it was NBA games.
Yeah.
And he essentially turned himself in, I believe is what had happened.
Yeah.
And so that's, as you tried to, how do you prevent players from doing this type of stuff? A big part of it is education. You got to figure out the right way to educate. Hey, you can do this. You can't do this.
Right.
You're not a regular you're not a regular person on campus who can do things.
Having been around a lot of these facilities, there's very little excuse for a coach.
Right.
Because that "Don't Bet on It" poster has been in every locker room for the last 30 years.
Yeah.
And it's still there, and they put more stuff up, and
Right.
there's more education now
Yes.
at every school about this stuff.
But if you're a regular college kid and everybody you know is
doing
talking
it.
about their
100%.
bets, there's certainly a lot of peer pressure. And part of what they talked about in this webinar last week with these gambling experts is how do you have proper punishment without discouraging kids from coming forward? If a kid is caught up in something and he realizes I might lose my eligibility if I tell them this, how do you? And that's something they're still trying to figure out.
Of the opinion that because the entire enterprise, like the financial health of the entire enterprise rests on the games being on the up and up, like your penalties for people who gamble on their own sport have to be completely draconian.
Yeah.
Like lifetime bans.
They have to be.
And or because you have no choice, you have to. But it is a little bit stickier. For example, a kid can go, a college football player who's 21 years old can go into a casino and play a hand of blackjack. And that's not, like everybody can do that. That's not a reason to kick him off the team or anything. But what if he gambles on an NBA game? That doesn't affect what he's doing as a college football player. The worry is, and the worry back in the bookie days, which you would get underwater with somebody.
Right.
And if somebody comes to try and they give you the choice of we'll break your thumbs or you help us fix this game.
Yeah.
That was the worry before. That's not the worry with these big corporate casinos.
No.
Now, you do worry about people getting addicted to gambling, getting in a financial position that they can't get out of, that sort of thing. But it's more the integrity of the sport part that they need to focus on. And I don't know that you can necessarily ban every college athlete from betting on, NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, horse racing.
Right.
Like, I don't know how you can justify that.
No, I don't think you can. And that was the whole Virginia Tech situation. If you go back and read the story, I think his suspension by the book would have been a season or a year or something like that.
Yeah.
And they made it a lot less than that, I believe.
Because I don't know if I'm trying to remember the details, but he had read something or he'd seen something and thought, oh, I might have messed up.
Yeah.
Let's just run this by. And they did. And it almost was a very stiff penalty. Yeah.
It still was. So that's, and to this point, we have a lot of poor college athletes who come into college, and that makes them especially vulnerable to people who may want to feed them this. And that's what makes college sports uniquely vulnerable to this stuff as opposed to the NFL, where
I do wonder if NIL helps on that front somewhat.
It could.
Although I've always said, if you want to fix a football game, there's one player you can fix a football game with.
Referee.
Long snapper.
Yeah.
Think about it. If the long snapper has the worst day of his life, if he sails a couple punt snaps over a guy's head and then skips a couple field goal snaps or extra point snaps, you just swing the point spread completely.
Yeah, that's true.
So that's the part that you could do. And that's not a person who's going to be getting a ton of NIL money.
No.
So they have to be very vigilant about this stuff. And so I'll be really interested to see how much more comes out about this, because I think if you're the state of Ohio, if you're the University of Alabama, you have to be really, really transparent about this.
Yeah, it's back to the point, like, nobody expected, like, we didn't expect the first one of these to come out to be a coach.
No. My initial, I saw the stories, and David Purdom from ESPN was the one who broke this on Monday.
Yeah.
So credit where credit's due.
Yep.
This is when Ohio took Alabama baseball games off the board. My initial impression was could be a player, could be a support staffer, somebody got some information.
Could there be a manager sharing injuries?
Correct. Yeah, somebody got some inside information, passed it along, and that's what happened. Never in my wildest dreams would I expect a head coach to be the one who gets
which
implicated.
Which is we don't know. Is there a pattern to this stuff, or was it a random one-off?
Right, and that's one of those things. So I asked Ronnie Johns, who runs the Louisiana Gaming Control Board. I said, "Are you going to could Louisiana pursue criminal action if they find out that Brad Bohannon was involved in this?" And he, remember, the game was in Baton Rouge.
Yeah.
So in terms of
that'd be that jurisdiction,
it'd be somebody in Louisiana. He said they had no information right now that anything happened physically in Louisiana, but he said if the regulators in Ohio provide them with something that makes them suspicious that something happened in Louisiana, they will investigate. So you could potentially see criminal charges, I would think, in Ohio for the person there.
Yeah.
And if that could lead to something more in Louisiana.
And Matt Holt said, I said it was 15 to 18 flags per month on things, and he said that usually leads to 10 to 12 arrests or suspensions
per month.
Per month. So you're talking 120 people a year. Whether that crosses the legal barrier or not, we don't know. But these things often result in that.
Right. And they will take this seriously. We've talked about the NIL rules, and no one will actually enforce those state laws. They will enforce these state laws because there's so much freaking money at stake.
Yes. The integrity of everything is at stake, and the money behind it, because there's NIL, it's a state law. It's about giving money to players.
It's a lot of money. I mean, we've seen this. Even in our business, one of my former coworkers at SI, and at Charlotte Wilder, she announced she was going to work, I believe,
at Meadowlark with DraftKings.
Yeah. So that's a sports book. That the money is coming from the sports book. They want content because they would like to keep you engaged, keep you in their walled garden, so that, hey, there's a game. You want to throw a little action on that? So we know how much money's coming into this. I mean, we're seeing it ourselves, and then these athletes are just they will benefit tangentially from it just because it is putting more money in the system in general, but they're going to have to be careful.
Because remember, Drew Brees was a ambassador for PointsBet, I think, when he got the Purdue interim job for the bowl game. And so he had to back out of that, and they had to clear that with a bunch of things. So like we've had former...
Will Compton, who does a podcast for Barstool with Taylor Lewan, the Bussin' with the Boys show, he was going to sign with a team in the NFL, but he was doing a gambling show, and it became so complicated that he ended up signing.
Yeah. So like you're embracing it, but you're also trying to keep it at arm's length, and it's a very difficult thing to balance when it comes to credibility from the viewers, from the fans.
Yeah. And I don't blame viewers, fans.
No.
Because and I also don't blame leagues for this. Like if I'm Adam Silver, if I'm Roger Goodell, if I'm Greg Sankey or Tony Petitti, the new Big Ten commissioner, like nothing's more important to me and my business than you, the fan, thinking that my games are on the up and up.
If I'm one of those league commissioners, I'm being completely transparent with how this was found, the work you do with U.S. Integrity. It's not, you'll talk to, hey, we educate the players, we educate the teams that do this, but you have to tell people how you're monitoring.
That's the one thing I'm very interested to see if they do, because this is not a group of people in college sports that has been especially forthcoming about that stuff. Usually we have to go dig it up.
Yeah, but I mean, you go to the U.S. Integrity website and they have their clients, and SEC's on there, Big 12's on there. And I asked Greg Sankey about it last week at CFP meetings, but that's not something they're promoting. Hey, no. And they're going to have to, especially the SEC, especially after this.
Yeah.
You know, Greg Sankey released some statements, said Alabama is doing this properly and all this kind of stuff. So if you're them, you'd be like, hey, this is what we're doing to make sure all these games are legitimate.
And yes, it's embarrassing because you had to fire your baseball coach over this. But it's probably necessary when you get the full accounting of how all this happened to tell everybody how this happened.
Yes. And because like we said at the beginning, it's an example of the system working. Now, if the way this bet was reportedly placed was not so haphazard, maybe the system does or doesn't catch it. But you lean into like, hey, we caught this. We plan to catch this.
It's also important for them if no one else is involved, if no players are involved at Alabama, and no players are involved at LSU, and no coaches are involved at LSU, and no other coaches are involved at Alabama, that information needs to be passed along. And we put some of it in the story. I got some off the record confirmation of that. That needs to be told on the record.
Yes.
Because again, nothing is more important to the state of your business than everyone thinking your games are on the up and up. That's it.
Mm-hmm. And you're going to have people questioning that more and more.
Yeah.
When one of these happens, when another one of these happens, they have to emphasize, no, this is how it's supposed to work. It's going to happen. We're going to catch it.
And I noticed, like I talked to the Louisiana Gaming Control, first words out of his mouth, this is the system working.
Right.
And they understand, like, because this will go away if they can't find this stuff.
And again, we had big famous issues with players and teams in these scandals. Alex Karras, the Lions player back in the 60s, I think, got suspended for a year. So yes, when a couple more Detroit Lions players were suspended,
then he starred in Webster.
Yeah, and then a couple weeks ago, when the Detroit Lions are once again involved in players betting on stuff, like of all the teams, like this is the way it happened.
Well,
like,
and just say, like you said, this happened at the Reds ballpark.
With Pete Rose. Pete Rose famously did. So it's not like this has never been a part of the sport. It's been at such a monumental level of the sport that everybody's tracking that stuff at a level now that they never were before.
It is another layer. You know, we always talk about NIL. We talk about the transfer portal. This is another new layer of the changes that are happening in sport. And this isn't just college sports. This is all sports. But it is something you're going to see more and more and hear more and more about, because more states have legalized it. More states are going to legalize it. It's just become part of the fabric of sports, and we're going to have to keep covering it. So Ari will be back off vacation very soon, and he can fully explain this to everybody.
He's chomping at the bit, I'm sure, to get on here. And again, like we're here.
Never has someone wanted to leave the Turks and Caicos so badly.
What day is it? What day?
To go talk about college baseball.
I think he's leaving pretty soon. But again, we're out here in Arizona, and literally the company who caught this was already giving presentations to the conferences about this week. Like, administrators may not totally know, but they are trying to figure it out, and there are companies here that are trying to get on top of that right away. And what fortuitous timing. And
we are still trying to figure out exactly what the heck happened. You can keep reading The Athletic, and we will give you as much as we can find out, because this is a really interesting story. And I think there's a little more to it. And I think the people involved should probably, once they finish their own investigations, tell everybody what happened. But we're going to keep trying to find out exactly what happened.
Interesting times at Alabama right now, that's for sure.
That's exactly right.